I've always prided myself on being a good mother. It wasn't always easy, but I did what I had to do. Raising Daniel was my world, and I knew no other way to be. My husband and I worked hard to give him everything we could, but more than that, we gave him our time, our love, and our attention. From the very beginning, Daniel was our joy. He was that bright, wide-eyed child who always seemed to be looking at the world with wonder. I remember those early years like they were yesterday. The way he clung to my hand on his first day of kindergarten, reluctant to leave the safety of my arms. I had to stay strong for him, but inside, I was tearing apart, watching my baby grow up so quickly. He was always such a sensitive boy, a dreamer, and I did my best to protect him from any hurt. There were the sleepless nights when he'd come into my room, holding his little teddy bear, too scared to sleep alone. I'd hold him close, whispering to him that everything would be okay, and every time, he'd fall asleep in my arms, content, knowing he was safe. And then there were the more difficult moments, when he went through his awkward teenage years, the way he started pulling away from me, wanting more freedom, and yet, still needing me in ways I didn't fully understand. I was his confidant, the one he'd run to when life felt too heavy, when friends let him down, or when a school project just wasn't going right. It was always me, always us. We had this bond that felt unbreakable, but as he got older, things began to change. I knew it was coming, but I wasn't ready for it. I had always imagined that when Daniel found someone special, he would still make time for me. I never thought it would happen this way, that his life would slowly slip away from mine without me even noticing until it was too late, when he met Laura. I didn't know what to expect. She was different from anyone he had dated before. I remember the first time she came over to our house. I tried to make her feel at home. Of course, I made her favorite meal, the one she mentioned in passing during their first visit. She was polite, but there was something about her that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't that she was unkind or rude. No, it was something deeper, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. But Daniel was in love. He smiled in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. He was happy, and that made me happy, or at least I tried to convince myself it did. For a while, everything seemed okay. She'd visit often, and I would try my best to welcome her. I made the effort, doing everything I could to show her she was part of the family. But over time, I couldn't ignore the changes at first. It was small things. The dinners we used to have as a family, those long evenings where we would talk about our day, laugh about silly things, slowly turned into something distant. When Daniel started bringing Laura around more often, our time together became less and less. I understood that he was building a life of his own, but it felt like I was being pushed to the side. I told myself I was being dramatic. After all, he was growing up. He had his own life now. But deep down, I knew something was different. The connection I once had with my son was slowly unraveling, and the more I tried to hold on to him, the more he pulled away. Then came the phone calls. They started getting shorter and less frequent. At first, I thought he was just busy, that maybe his work was demanding more of his time, but soon, I realized he was avoiding my calls. He'd text me back with short replies like "busy mom" or "talk later." I didn't know what to make of it. It was like I was becoming a stranger in his life, a distant figure that he felt obligated to check in on, but never truly cared to connect with. I could feel my heart breaking slowly, piece by piece. I wanted to tell him how much I missed him, how much I needed him to need me, but I kept quiet. I didn't want to make things harder. I told myself, maybe this is just how it's supposed to be. Maybe I'm just overreacting. Then one day, he invited Laura over for dinner. I thought, maybe this time, things would be different. Maybe we could all sit down like we used to and talk, laugh, enjoy each other's company. I wanted so badly for it to feel like old times, even if just for a moment. When they arrived, Daniel seemed distant, almost detached. He didn't hug me like he used to. Instead, he gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, his mind somewhere else, his attention divided. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just a bad day, and tried to push the feeling away. But as dinner went on, I felt like I was sitting at the edge of a table, watching a life that wasn't mine anymore. Laura, sitting across from me, barely said a word. She was polite, but cold. She didn't make much of an effort to include me in the conversation, and Daniel seemed to be on her wavelength, not mine. I asked Daniel about his work, about his friends, anything to try to make a connection. But he was distant, his responses brief and uninterested. It felt like I was talking to a stranger, not the son I once knew so well. And then, after dinner, Laura made a comment that made everything fall into place. She said, almost casually, "We're thinking of moving soon. We need our own space." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unwelcome. It was the first time I realized just how much things had changed. It wasn't just that Daniel was building a life with Laura. It was that I wasn't a part of it. I wasn't invited into their world anymore. I felt that deep ache in my chest, the one I couldn't ignore anymore. But I didn't say anything. I just smiled, nodded, and pretended that everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. I could feel myself slipping further and further away from the person I once was to him. That night, I lay in bed, wide awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking back to when Daniel was small, when he'd come to me for comfort, when I was his whole world. And now, I was left alone with the haunting thought, where had my place gone? I knew the truth then, even if I didn't want to accept it. Things were never going to be the same again. And as much as it broke my heart, I knew there was nothing I could do to change it. The days that followed that dinner were quiet, too quiet, if I'm being honest. I waited for Daniel to call, to send a message, to ask me how I was doing, but nothing came. I thought back to when he was younger, how his face would light up when I walked into the room, how his voice would soften when he needed me. Now, it felt like I was the one reaching out. But the distance between us was growing, no matter how hard I tried to bridge it. I tried not to overthink it. Maybe he was busy. Maybe Laura needed more of his attention. I told myself it was natural, that he was building a life, starting his own family, and it was to be expected that his priorities would shift. But it was hard to swallow. It was like I was fading into the background of his life. No longer the person he turned to for comfort or advice. The phone calls, when they came, were brief. No longer did we talk for hours about his day, about his plans, about the little things. Instead, it was always, "I'm busy," or "Can I call you later?" Every time I hung up, I felt this growing emptiness, a void that seemed to grow bigger with each passing day. I kept telling myself it would pass, that he would come around, that things would go back to normal. But deep down, I feared the truth that I wasn't the center of his world anymore. One afternoon, about a week after that awkward dinner, I decided to stop by his apartment unannounced. I didn't want to seem like I was imposing, but I missed him. I missed hearing his voice, seeing his smile. So, I thought maybe if I dropped by, it would be like old times. Maybe I could somehow pull him back to me, pull him back to the son I used to know. When I knocked on the door, it felt strangely unfamiliar. The sound of my knuckles against the wood echoed in a way that made me feel like I was intruding. I stood there for a moment, holding my breath, waiting for him to answer. But it was Laura who opened the door, her face tight, her expression unreadable. "Hi," I said, forcing a smile. "I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by." "Oh," she replied, her voice flat. "Daniel's not home right now. He's working late." I could hear the tension in her voice, and it made my stomach turn. "Oh, that's okay," I said, trying to sound casual, even though my heart was racing. "I'll catch him later." She nodded, but there was something about the way she looked at me, like she was relieved that I was leaving. I stood there for a second, unsure of what to say. But before I could muster any words, she quickly shut the door behind her, as I walked back to my car. The sinking feeling in my chest grew deeper. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking things, but the reality of it all hit me hard. It wasn't just about the lack of time, the lack of attention. It was the fact that, in some unspoken way, I wasn't welcome anymore. I spent the next few days feeling lost in my own thoughts. I couldn't focus on anything. I didn't want to cook. I didn't want to go out. I just wanted my son back. The one who would sit with me on the porch and talk about his hopes and dreams. The one who would call me just to say he loved me. But that son seemed so far away now, like a distant memory, slipping further and further from my reach. And then there were the moments when I'd catch myself holding on to hope. Maybe he was just adjusting. Maybe this was a phase. Maybe Laura just needed more time to get used to the idea of me being part of their lives. But the more I hoped, the more I felt like I was clutching onto something that wasn't real anymore. One evening, I finally got the courage to call him. It was late, but I needed to hear his voice. I needed to feel connected to him, even if only for a moment. When the phone rang, I tried to steady my breath, my heart thumping in my chest. After what felt like an eternity, he answered. "Hey Mom," Daniel said, his voice sounding tired. "What's up?" I tried to sound casual, like nothing was wrong. "Just wanted to check in," I said. "I miss you." There was a long pause on the other end, a silence that felt heavy. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Yeah, I miss you too, Mom. But things are really busy right now with work and everything. I felt a pang of disappointment. I understand, honey. I just wanted to talk. I miss our talks, you know? He sighed, and I could hear the weariness in his voice. Yeah, I know, Mom. I know. But it's not just me. Laura's been kind of stressed lately, and I need to be there for her. There it was, the words I had been dreading. He was choosing her. He was telling me, in the most subtle way possible, that I wasn't his priority anymore. It was her that he was focusing on, and I was just there. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat. Of course, I said, my voice faltering. I just wanted you to know I'm here, if you ever need me. There was another pause, and then he said, Thanks, Mom. I'll talk to you soon, okay? I didn't know how to respond. Okay, I whispered, before the call ended. I sat there in the silence, staring at the phone in my hand, feeling the walls close in around me. I wasn't just losing him, I was losing the version of him that I had held on to for so many years. The next few days were a blur. I went about my routines, tried to keep busy, but everything felt hollow. I felt like I was losing my place in the world, in my own family. I kept reminding myself that he was a grown man now, and that this was what I had raised him to be. But I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere along the way, I had become invisible to him. I remember one evening, after another failed attempt to reach him, I stood by the window, staring out at the street. It was raining lightly, and I could hear the soft tap of raindrops against the glass. The world outside seemed to be moving on, and here I was, standing still, stuck in this painful limbo. That's when it hit me. The distance between us wasn't just physical, it was emotional, too. I wasn't just a mom anymore. I wasn't the one he turned to for comfort or advice. I wasn't the one he called when he needed help. I wasn't the one he needed at all. And as I stood there, watching the rain fall, I realized that nothing was going to bring him back to me. Nothing except time, and maybe a painful acceptance of the truth that my son had chosen her, and there was nothing I could do about it. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I began to accept the reality of the situation. I spent most of that time quietly processing everything, the phone calls that had become less frequent, the visits that grew shorter and less meaningful. I wasn't angry, not exactly. I was just sad and confused. It wasn't just about losing my son to his new life. It was about the sense of loss that lingered in the quiet spaces, the way I had once been a central figure in his world, and now I was becoming a shadow in the background. I decided to take a step back, to stop calling him, to stop showing up unannounced. Part of me hoped that maybe he would realize what was happening, that he would miss me, that he would make the effort to reconnect. But another part of me, the quieter part, knew I couldn't keep pushing. I couldn't keep begging for the attention I used to have so freely. If I wanted him to come back to me, it had to be on his terms, not mine. And so, I waited. I tried to fill my days with other things. I took up old hobbies I had forgotten about, like knitting and gardening. I reconnected with some of my friends, people I hadn't seen in years, because I needed to remind myself that I wasn't alone. But even then, the loneliness was always there, lingering just beneath the surface. I didn't want to admit it, but I was missing a huge part of my life. The void he left behind was unmistakable. Then, one Saturday, the unexpected happened. I was sitting on my couch, knitting a scarf for the upcoming winter, when the doorbell rang. It was the first time in weeks that Daniel had shown up, and I didn't know how to feel. Part of me was relieved. Part of me was still holding on to the hurt. I stood up quickly, my heart racing, unsure of what to expect. When I opened the door, I saw him standing there, looking a little unsure of himself. His eyes were tired, like he hadn't slept much, but there was something in his gaze that felt familiar, something that reminded me of the boy I had once known. "Hey, Mom," he said softly, his voice almost apologetic. I stood there for a moment, just looking at him. It had been so long since I had really looked at him. He was taller now, his face more mature, but his eyes still held that same warmth, the one that had once been so full of love for me. "Hey, Daniel," I replied, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was beating a little faster. "Come in." He stepped inside, and we stood there in silence for a moment. It felt like we were both waiting for the right words to come, but neither of us knew where to begin. Finally, Daniel spoke. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, his voice quieter now, about everything. About us. I felt a lump form in my throat. I didn't want to say anything too soon, but I couldn't help it. "What do you mean?" He looked down at the floor for a moment, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, then met my eyes. I've been distant, I know that, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean for it to happen, but I was caught up in, well, everything, in building my life with Laura, and I lost sight of what really mattered. I lost sight of you. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I held them back. I had waited so long for this moment, and here it was, right in front of me. I didn't know how to fix it, he continued, his voice shaking a little now. I didn't know how to make things right. I thought you'd be okay with it, that you'd understand. But I see now that I've hurt you, and I'm so sorry for that, Mom. Hearing him say those words, finally, after everything, it was like a weight lifted off my chest. It wasn't an apology I had been waiting for, because I didn't want him to feel guilty. I didn't want to make him feel bad. But hearing him acknowledge the distance, hearing him recognize the hurt I had felt, was like a balm to a wound I hadn't even known how to heal. I took a deep breath and nodded, trying to find the right words. Daniel, I've missed you so much. And I understand that life changes, that you're building a future with Laura. But you've been part of my life for so long, and it felt like I was losing you. It's not that I didn't want you to move on, it's that I didn't know where I fit anymore. I know, he said, his voice soft. I see that now. I should have done more to make you feel like you were still important. Because you are. You always have been. There was silence between us for a few moments, but it wasn't the kind of silence that felt heavy and full of hurt. It was a quiet understanding, a shared space where both of us knew the other was listening, truly listening. For the first time in a long while, finally, I spoke, my voice steady despite the emotion. I'm proud of you, Daniel. You've grown into a wonderful man, and no matter where your life takes you, I'll always be here for you. Always. He smiled, that familiar smile I had missed so much, the one that made me feel like everything would be okay, even when it didn't feel like it. Thanks, Mom, he said, his voice full of gratitude. I don't deserve you, but I'm really glad you're still here. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't need to have all the answers. I didn't need to fix everything, or rush to make things perfect. Sometimes, healing takes time. Sometimes, it's about giving each other space to grow, and then finding your way back to one another. The next few months were different, not perfect, but different in a way that felt real, in a way that made me feel like we could rebuild our relationship, piece by piece. Daniel started calling more, just to check in, and when he came over, it wasn't awkward. We talked, we laughed, we remembered how easy it used to be to just be together. I didn't expect things to go back to the way they were. That version of our relationship, the one where I was always the center of his world, was gone. And maybe that's okay. I had to let go of the past to make room for the future. And while the future wasn't exactly what I had imagined, it was something we could both share. One Sunday, Daniel invited me to lunch with him and Laura. I was nervous at first, unsure of what the dynamics would be like now that things had shifted. But as we sat together, eating and talking, I realized something. I was still part of his life, maybe not in the same way as before, but I was still there, and that was enough. I've learned that love is not about holding on too tightly. It's about letting go when you need to, and trusting that the ones you love will find their way back to you. It's about understanding that life changes, and sometimes people grow in different directions, but that doesn't mean they can't find their way back to each other. And so, I continue to live my life, filled with memories of the past, but open to the future. Daniel is still my son. He always will be. And though things may never be exactly the same, I've come to understand that love is flexible. It doesn't always look how we expect it to, but it's always there, quietly, beneath the surface. The hardest part of love is sometimes letting go, but in letting go, we make space for new beginnings, for new connections, and that's where the real healing begins.